This YouTube channel recently turned 10 years old, and over the past decade here on BookTube, I have seen a lot of people come and go, and I myself took a little detour over to TikTok. When I think back to the times that I was most engaged with BookTube, that was a combination of creating content, but also watching videos and participating in comment sections and contributing to community content and discussions. I'm gonna try and not get very back in my day about all of this because I also recognize that part of it is on me and the way that I've engaged with the community over the years, and because I took that TikTok detour, I think it has become more difficult for me to sort of get re-engaged with the community. Specifically, I think it's easier for me to find content that I enjoy because I enjoy the content or the creator versus finding my trusted reviewers, right? Finding those people that share similar taste with me, that we align enough that if they recommend something, I know there's a really high likelihood that I will also enjoy it, or at the very least, I will get it. Because so many times I take a recommendation and I just don't get it. Sam and I were recently talking about this, about wanting to find more people where our tastes align. Again, I watch and enjoy content where my taste doesn't align with the creator and I just enjoy the content anyways, but it really does feel good to have those handful of people where your tastes do align. And that was the birth of the idea of this tag. That, and back in my day, we did a lot of tags, and I think that there was more sort of community participation. I think back to 10 years ago when I was jumping into BookTube, I was doing Top 10 Tuesday and participating in tags, and it definitely at least felt like there were more ways to participate, where we were fighting YouTube's lesser algorithm by creating instances where we could find each other anyway. And so this is an old school tag. And specifically, Sam and I thought it would be great to do a tag where we could all get to know each other's book tastes, ask some questions that can start at least get us on that path of understanding where a content creator's tastes sort of are, whether or not they're new to BookTube. This tag is for absolutely everyone, and it could be sort of a litmus test of whether or not your taste will align with someone else. There's 15 questions, so we're gonna jump right in, and I'm gonna do my best to be concise about these. Number one, how do you rate books? Give a quick rundown of how you do your star ratings, or if you don't use star ratings, how do you evaluate books? I am a star rating truther. It feels like part of cyclical discourse in the community is that every once in a while someone will be well, actually star ratings are bad, and it will catch on and people will be star ratings are bad. I know where it comes from because I think that people want star ratings to be and do things that star ratings are not equipped to be or do, right? They are meant to communicate very quick information, and they are meant to help sort of categorize, but everybody does star ratings differently, right? It's part of getting to know the creator to get to know how they evaluate books. So it can't be a one size fits all thing. It's not going to tell you the intricacies or the nuance of what somebody thought about a book. And it is really subjective and it can be very fluid, right? But I find all of that is just what a star rating is, and they're very helpful to me. And I really enjoy to see a star rating from someone else. Here is how I do my star ratings. They are a combination of quality and enjoyment for me. I take both things into account when I'm picking my star rating. At 1 star, that is a book that I think has no redeeming qualities. I would recommend it to no one, and I did not enjoy reading it. I probably don't have one good thing to say about that book. So then 2 stars for me is that mostly it was a bad experience. At 2 stars, I also did not enjoy that reading experience. I also would not recommend this book, but the difference is that at a 2 star, I can say 1 or 2 things that the book did well, right? There are 1 or 2 elements where I can say at least it did this couple of things well. I have more bad things to say about a 2-star book than I have good things to say about a 2-star book. At 3 stars, there are equal good and bad elements to me. For every good thing I can say about the book, I can say 1 bad thing. Whether or not I enjoyed a 3-star is not immediately evident, but you know that at a 3-star rating, I think that there are equal parts good and bad things that the work did, and so I will recommend it with caveats. At a 4-star, we've now tipped the scale where there are more good things about the book than bad things. I probably only have 1 or 2 things that I can say about a 4-star book book where it didn't quite meet the mark, but for the most part, it handled all of its elements well. And now we've entered the part of the scale where I guaranteed enjoyed my reading experience with the book. So I had a good time. I have mostly good things to say about it. I probably have one or two things that I could critique, and I will absolutely recommend a 4-star. So we get to 5-star, and at that point, if I have anything negative to say about a 5-star, there are things that feel so minimal that they don't really move the needle. It handled all of its elements well, and I loved my reading experience. I do half stars, and at that point, that really is more of like feelings and emotions and enjoyment that kind of move that needle up to a 1/2 star. So like the difference between like I have one or two negative things to say about a 4-star read and probably nothing about a 5-star read. I use 4.5 a lot because sometimes it's like I have one negative thing to say about this 5-star and it didn't bother me, but I can see where it could bother someone else. That's like a 4.5 star. So at the point where I'm getting into 1/2 stars, it really is sort of like emotions and like feelings about the book or whatnot. But that is how I sort of frame all of my star ratings. 2, how do you approach reviewing books? What's your review style? Are you analytical, emotional, casual, or structured? I always say about myself that I go into the active reading like I'm an emotions first reader. Media in general really impacts my emotions. I laugh, I cry, I get stressed, but then when I am reviewing, I tend to be more analytical and I tend to come across more analytical. I want to explain to people what my experience with the book was. Even if it was an emotional sort of reaction, I like to get to the bottom of like what caused it. What were the things that like stood out to me and share that in my review. That's the thing about reviewing that I really enjoy. What's the book that made you a reader? Whether it was your first favorite or the one that got you hooked, what book started it all? I'm a lifelong reader, so I've been reading for as long as I have memories. I read a lot of like the elder millennial staples. I was reading The Babysitter's Club. I was reading The Boxcar Children. I was reading the Wayside School stories. So a lot of those are early in my memory. But a first favorite and the book that always jumps to the top of my mind when I get asked a question like this is The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe by C.S. Lewis. This is the copy that I was reading from also that was stolen from the library. My older sister, never returned it to her elementary school library, and probably because I was reading this all the time. I also still have the copies that I first got when I got the whole series. Number 2 is missing because I lent it to my cousin and she never gave it back. But these are pretty worn as well because for a couple summers during my childhood, we would just take road trips from Florida to New York, where my family is, or when we took road trips to Tampa or Orlando to visit family, I would just take these like in the car and I would read them like back to back in all of my car time. So they also have seen their fair share. Number 4, do you have a genre niche? Are there certain genres you gravitate toward, or do you read widely across genres? I do read widely, but there are genres that I read more than others. Science fiction and fantasy are always my most read genres. And then depending on the year, romance will be up there. I think for the last few years, I've been a little burnt out on romance, so that hasn't been quite as high, but years before that, it was in my 3rd place. Same with literary fiction. There have been years where my literary fiction reading is super, super high and some not so much, but I am at least reading sort of a handful of works every year in both of those genres. I'm always reading mysteries and thrillers as well. I don't read as much horror because I'm a big baby, but I do like gothic horror, and I will tend to read things that have crossover appeal. I read a bunch of nonfiction every year as well. Try to at least read a couple of short story collections every year as well. So I really like to keep a pulse on all genres. I love reading widely. I love trying new things. I love being surprised by stories. Number 5, do you generally prefer character-driven or plot-driven stories? I can enjoy either. I like a mix of both, but if you forced me to pick one, I would pick character-driven over plot-driven personally. I do like a very pacey book, but I will say, if you've built the kind of story that can be undone by a spoiler, that is probably not the book for me, right? Like if knowing one thing about the book, it's like ruins the reading experience, that is not the book for me. That is not like the kind of thing that I gravitate towards. When I say plot driven, I want something that is pacey, not necessarily that like hinges on a twist. I can enjoy a twist, but I much prefer the sort of things where like there's a twist building that you see coming, right? That you're putting the pieces together and you're like, oh my God, this is what's happening. I know it. Like that sort of satisfaction satisfaction of it all coming together versus being blindsided by things. I don't really love that kind of reading experience. I tend to prefer things that are more character driven, or the kinds of things that are like readable and pacey versus like the things that are twisty. Number 6 is, what's a book you love so much that you don't care if others don't like it? What's the one book you love enough for everyone? So this question comes from a categorization that I've talked about like over the years here on my channel and over on the podcast as well, about like books that you love enough for everyone. So that is to say that books that if someone else doesn't like it, it doesn't really bother you, right? Like you get maybe why other people won't like it, but you love enough for everybody, versus books that like if someone else doesn't like it, that really is like a signal of a misalignment of taste. Like if you don't like this book, we're not vibing on the things that we like in books, versus if you don't like this book, I don't care, I love it enough for everybody. I sat here going back and forth on what I wanted to say for this question, but I think I finally settled on the Daughter of Smoke and Bone trilogy. There is like one particular reason that I would categorize this as like, it's fine, I love it enough for everybody. That reason is actually not Laini Taylor's very distinctive writing style, especially because it is flowery, it is lush, but it is not purple. She wields her words well. I would compare this to someone like Olive Blake, who I think is not using her words well. Like, what is Olive Blake even saying half the time? Who can say? That is not Laini Taylor. Laini Taylor is evocative. She is lush. She knows what she is saying and doing. It doesn't feel like a thesaurus threw up here, and it doesn't feel pretentious. So that is one element where if you're like, I don't like Laini Taylor's writing, our tastes just don't match. The reason that this is like fine, if you don't like it, I love it enough for everybody, is that this very much is of its moment. It very much is a 2012 sort of like fantasy romance. There are a lot of tropes in here that feel of its time. I think that they are well explored, but I understand why the vibe of it might be a little bit dated for people. I love this book so much. I love Karou as a protagonist. I do love that she takes those tropes that even when I read this in 2012, I was like, oh, like she understands them. The way that she approaches them feels really fresh because they're rooted in these characters and understanding these characters and in being really exquisitely written. So I love these books. I've reread them multiple times, and every time I read them, I'm like, yeah, man, that's good. I don't know what to tell you. So yeah, this one, I love it. It's fine. Yeah, it's fine. You don't have to love it. I got it. Of course, number 7 is the opposite of that. What's a book you love so much that if someone doesn't like it, you know your reading tastes don't align? I almost said Pride and Prejudice, because if you read Pride and Prejudice and you hate that book, that's like irreconcilable differences for me, I'm afraid. But I don't feel like that's very indicative of my taste necessarily. I mean, there are things in Pride and Prejudice that have been incredibly formative for me as a reader, right? But it is a classic, and I am not necessarily like a huge classics reader. So my actual answer, I think, is a little bit more indicative of my taste, and that is the Fairyland series by Catherine M. Valenti. This is one, again, where the writing is flowery. And so I know that not everybody likes it, but it is so, for me, it is so up my alley in terms of like being flowery with a purpose, of being witty, of being smart, of having these really lush settings and characters, of being found family and adventure and a portal fantasy. Like there are so many things here that are just so for me and done so incredibly well. It is so charming. It is so earnest also. And honestly, I think that's a thing that turns people off, is that it's so earnest. But if that is the case, then our tastes don't align, right? I love that this is earnest. I love that it is lush. I love that it is sort of like musical and witty, and it's doing so much with humor. It understands fairy tales. It's looking at the dark side of fairy tales while having this like very bright sort of world and cast of characters. All of the elements are just so good. They're so juicy. They're so smart. If you read this and you hate it, we're on opposite ends, my friend. You're still welcome here. But just know that if I'm 5-starring a book, that's probably 1 star for you. And if I'm 1-starring a book, I guess get it immediately. Number 8 is what's in your trash pocket. What books, tropes, or themes that you know are bad, but you love them anyway. So trash pocket is a term that we use over on Snark Squad and Snark Squad Pod. My best friend Nicole and I use this all the time to describe media that we think are bad quality or like not the best quality, we'll say, but that we still really enjoy, right? So a trash pocket are things that are for you that you can recognize the quality while also recognizing your enjoyment of it. Other people might call this sort of like a guilty pleasure, but we don't feel guilty about it. It's in my pocket. It's trash, but it's in my pocket. For me, this is the In Death series by J.D. Robb, who is, of course, Nora Roberts. One thing I'm going to say about Miss Nora Roberts, to put respect on her name, is that she knows how to write a mystery. She's going to write a really gripping mystery almost every time. And even the times where the mystery is not my favorite, like it still is so solidly pieced together that I just, again, have to put respect on her name. So I think in that aspect of these being mysteries, I won't necessarily call them trashy always, but there are so many things about this that you could critique. I could write an entire like thesis about the propaganda of it all and the ways that Nora Roberts tries to sort of evade that by putting this in a future and making these cops not our cops, right? There are specific ways that like our cops now in present day have been sort of legislated and changed so that these future cops are not our cops. But then again, there are portions of this that still do feel like propaganda, but then there are ways that I think that it is worth exploring some of what propaganda says about society, and not necessarily from the perspective of elevating cops, which that is something that should be explored as well, but like the fantasy of a justice system that works well and why people are so into this idea that we would have a system that works well, right? And that like where the bad guy gets caught every time at the end of the story. But on the other end of this is a series that is all in on punitive justice. Like our main character especially is always like, lock him up and throw away the key. So I don't know, it is very complex in its sort of politics. At the end of the day, it's being written by this older white lady, and oftentimes in the way that she is trying to be sort of inclusive and create this like diverse future world, it is very clunky and it feels very much like it's written by an older white lady. And now that it's been going on 60 books deep, it is also very clear that the characters have become almost caricatures. Am I gonna read like another 60 more? I mean, is Nora Roberts gonna live to do another 60 more? I don't know. But if she does and she writes them, I'm gonna read them because at this point, this is so firmly in my trash pocket. To be clear, I do not recommend these. Like, don't go read these and be like, Madi said. No, Madi is telling you that this is in her trash pocket. I'm not recommending it, okay? Number 9 is, do you have any deal breakers in books? Something that if present immediately turns you off from a book. I'm so soured on enemies to lovers, especially how like it's being overused and used in like the last few years and in this market. 9.5 times out of 10, if something is being marketed as an enemies to lovers, I don't like it. I don't think it's being done well. I think that it overly focuses on tropes. Like there are just certain like trope that people want to see depicted on the page, and it's not actually about the arc or the journey of being enemies and getting to lovers. I feel like enemies to lovers currently means that you fall in love with your enemy, and I hate that. If that is what is in your book, don't sign me up. I don't want it. I don't want to see the woman fall in love with her enemy, because that's what it ends up being most of the time, is that a woman falls in love with her abuser and it's romanticized. And I just have absolutely no interest. 0. Number 10 is, what's a strong opinion you have about a book released within the last year, whether it's overrated, underrated, or just a take you need to share? I feel like Bride was in the last year, so Bride is bad. Number 11, what do you look for in writing? What makes a book stand out to you? Is it prose style, themes, voice, structure, or something else? The writing is like make it or break it for me. Oftentimes people ask me like, what's a book that wasn't written that well that you enjoyed? And I'm like, I don't know how to answer that question, because my enjoyment of the book, my appreciation for the book hinges so much on the writing, which I feel like is sort of a hot take, and it shouldn't be because these are books. And I feel like the words on the page are like really important to your experience of the book. I mean, at least it is for me. To me, it doesn't have to be one thing. Because I am just such a lover of words and writing and storytelling, I can appreciate like a variety of styles. There isn't one style that sticks with me. I've already talked a couple of times about like lush poetic writing, and I do love that, but I also love like an economic turn of phrase. I love things that get you but are deceptively simple, where if you tried to describe the writing style genre would be difficult because it just feels very plain, very straightforward, and yet with like a precision and economy of language, the author manages to convey a lot. I love that style of writing. I love things that are very voicey, where you have a sense of either the narrator or the author. I love things that are experimental. I love things that feel really entrenched in their genre. I love things that feel like a worn t-shirt when you put it on, where it's so reminiscent of all of its predecessors in the genre that it just feels really warm and comfortable to slip into. I love it all. I think that it is difficult to sort of distill into one thing what good writing means to me, but I think it's that writing that like is functional, and that is to say that it serves its story. It understands how everything comes together, the prose, the syntax, its grammar, its word choice, its structure, all of those things work together to give you all of these other building blocks and pieces of the story, like the characters, the plot, the world building, right? Where it feels like the writing is working with the story and not against it. Number 12, how do you decide what to read next? Do you plan ahead, mood read, or follow external factors like hype or recommendations or arcs? I'm a mess. I am an absolute mess. At any given time, I am in the middle of reading like, I don't know, 20 books, things that I've started and I've given a chapter or two or put aside, and like I try them and put them aside because I am a mood reader, right? So I'll try, it doesn't quite hit, I'll move on to something else, but it's not like I will never return to that book. In fact, now I have it cataloged of like what is in that book and like the vibe of it. So when I'm ready for that vibe, I can like return to it. So I'm often just like picking things up and trying a couple of chapters and then moving on and putting it aside. And I also am heavily influenced by what other people are talking about. This happens to me all the time in my Discord, where people will be like, we're reading this. And I'll be like, ooh, me too. And I'll be like, I'll read it too. And I read a couple chapters and you never hear from me again. But I love being part of conversation about books. So I get really tempted to just like jump in and read what other people are reading. So like hype, conversation influences me. A thing I absolutely love doing is just opening my Libby app and like sorting by what's available now, especially audiobooks, and just scrolling through and seeing what stands out to me. So I do that a lot, but like what I'm going to read next is a mystery to me. What I'm reading now is like half a mystery to me. So there's absolutely no organization. I just have to read what sticks with me because I'm such a mood reader. It has to feel right. That is also why like content creation for me has been tricky, as things have moved here on YouTube to like those bigger project sort of things where people's like, I read the 10 books on this list, or I read 20 books all under this theme, because giving myself homework like that is nearly impossible for me. I have in the graveyard of videos that I have started and never finished are a bunch of ideas like that, where I'm like, I'm reading dragon books, I'm reading this books, and I start and then I can't commit. I have to follow my mood or else I'll get slumpy, or I'll stop reading altogether. The moment something feels like homework in my brain, especially this thing that is a hobby to me mostly, like I can't do it. So it's been really tricky for me to like figure out how to participate as the trends for videos changes here to that longer form project-based content, because me and a TBR, we're fighting every time. Number 13 is, where do you get your inspiration for your booktube content? What sparks your video ideas, other creators, trends, personal reading experiences? For me, it's kind of two things. If I'm not reading, I'm not creating. A lot of times I'm just getting inspiration for the things that I'm reading because I read something and I want to discuss it, or I read something and it sparks some other thought about like this pattern or this genre. So reading fuels a lot of my creativity, but I also get a lot of like a refilling of my creative well from being around other people, watching other content, from being in conversation with content creators, from being in my Discord community. So just being around other readers always fills my creative well. Number 14 is, if you could make any book go viral right now, what would it be? For me, that is A Spear Cuts Through Water by Simon Jimenez. This is another one where intellectually I understand why people won't like it. It is a lot, right? And it is very experimental, and the way that it uses points of view and the investment it requires right at the very beginning to sort of fall into the style of writing and the storytelling. Like I get all of that, but also this is the pinnacle of so much of what I love about stories and storytelling. To me, this is like masterpiece. masterful. It is well written, it is fresh, it is unique, it is thematically resonant, it is very voicey, and at the same time, it's got this really rich character core. At the heart of it is this story of two people that again feels like familiar. It feels almost fairy tale-like, and it bums me out that this didn't get the awards recognition that it deserved, absolutely. And so my only hope now is to keep mentioning it as a book that I want to go viral. And number 15 is, who are some booktubers with reading tastes similar to yours? An old school booktuber who's still around, who our tastes usually align, and if I pick up a recommendation from them, I know I will either love it or like really get it, and that is Rincey from Rincey Reads. And then somebody who I met over the last couple of years, our trash pockets don't usually align, but our our core taste on books or our thoughts on books are usually right there, and that's Jamila from Jamila Be Reading. So I will of course tag both of them in the comments below. If you want to hear more about what books I'm reading and my taste, the best way to do that is to follow my homepage. It's called Mareas, and you can follow for absolutely free. And here's where I've been posting my little essays, and anytime I have strong feelings about a book, this is where it's going. I've kind of given up on Goodreads, and I do all of my tracking of my reading in a personal spreadsheet, but over on Mareas, I've been like dumping the thoughts that I have about books. And if you follow for free, you can also get occasional bonus videos. There's one I just put up that's like a Bookish Mail unboxing sort of thing, and I'm giving away some books on that video, so you can check that out. Going forward, that is the home for my written reviews. If you have read or would like to read any of the books that I've mentioned, let's chat about that down in the comments. If there are creators that you would like to see do this tag, please tag them in the comments. I really hope that you guys will participate, tag Sam and I in your responses so that we can add it to the playlist and create that little resource for everybody. Thank you so much for watching my answers to these questions, and I will see you guys soon. It's my anxiety, it's always watching me. Oh.